Hi, I'm Jim O'Connor, and this is the Married Guy's Guide to Life. Today's installment, Never Play Poker with a Nun. I come from a long line of storytellers. On my mom's side, there was the lovable curmudgeon, Grandpa Arnold. You'd mention a current event, and he'd not only have an opinion, he'd also produce an historical reference to affirm that opinion. Across the kitchen table sat the ever-passionate Grandma Lucy. Her renditions of chapters from Bible stories for children were nothing short of spellbinding. Her take on the David and Goliath slingshot scene was epic. You'd laugh, you'd cry, you'd remember. She was oral interpretation of literature at its best. And let's not forget my great Uncle Bill. Uncle Bill raised giant Belgian draft horses, told classic tall tales straight out of the Old West, and had all of his nieces and nephews utterly convinced there were real alligators in his stock pond. Then on my dad's side of the family, we had the one and only Grandpa Bud. Frank A. Bud Teenan was a storyteller extraordinaire. He had a story or piece of advice for any incident, predicament, or occasion. Where did he get his material? Life. And what a life it was. From the time we were puppies, Grandpa Bud told us stories about when he was a short order cook, and when he was a cattle rancher, and when he was a prize fighter, and when he was a semi-pro baseball player. He did it all, and it all was true. Bud Teenan lived a colorful life. The stories that life produced were masterpieces of insight and wit that illuminated the human qualities he cherished most, like duty, honor, hope, love, grit, and above all, humor. Grandpa Bud had two passions in life, fishing and telling stories. He did both like they were his job. We started going to Minnesota and fishing with Grandpa Bud when I was in 4th grade. It became our summer tradition. Every day was the same. You could set your clock by it. My brother Mike and I gave each part of the day a nickname. The early bird show began when Grandpa and Dad left before sunrise to go walleye and northern fishing. When they came back, we'd make breakfast. Immediately following breakfast was the big show. We'd load up the rented no-frills Lund fishing boat and head across Diamond Lake to our secret crappie spot. Once the crappies stopped biting, we'd re-rig and troll for walleyes. Then about 11 a.m., we'd make our way to the lily pads to try our luck with the sunfish. At noon, we'd head in for lunch. Now, Grandpa was a phenomenal cook, so that was something to look forward to. Following lunch was the afternoon show. Grandpa would head out again. Now, he knew full well the fish would usually stop biting during the heat of the day, but he was a fisherman on a mission. Truth be told, his addiction rubbed off on me, so I always went along. Now, Dad and Mike, on the other hand, were smarter than us. They sat out the afternoon show on shore in the shade. It was during one of those insanely hot, uncomfortable afternoons in 1976 that Grandpa Bud shared with me some of the best advice I've ever received. It was about 3 p.m., and we were anchored about 10 yards off the lily pads on Diamond Lake. There was no breeze. It was so hot, I swear I could smell my hair starting to burn under my ever-present baseball cap. My bobbers sat on the still water just waiting for a sunfish to come by and take that big, juicy night crawler suspended on a hook precisely 2 feet below my split shot weight, which in turn was precisely 1.5 feet below my red and white bobber. Grandpa was a stickler for exactitude. As I straddled the hard wooden bench seat and watched a dragonfly attempt to land on my bobber, I heard Grandpa quietly rummaging through his tackle box. When the fishing was slow, his habit was to methodically review the contents of that ancient tackle box. He'd quietly hum to himself as he'd pick up each lure, inspect it, and gently replace it. He'd chuckle quietly when a certain lure reminded him of some past fishing adventure or mishap. It was a way to pass the time and commune with old memories. It was at times like that when he'd decide to share with me a pearl of his wisdom. I could almost feel it coming, like a storm brewing on the horizon. The humming from the stern suddenly stopped and I heard, "Jimmy, there's 2 things you need to remember if you want to be successful in life. Number 1, 3 of a kind beats 2 pair. And number 2, never, under any circumstances, play poker with a nun." With that, He returned to rummaging in his tackle box and humming his sonata. I stared at him as my 12-year-old brain struggled to process his sage advice. Unsure, I simply replied, "Thanks, Grandpa," and returned to monitoring my bobber. True to form, Grandpa Bud had simply led the horse to water. It was up to the horse, me, to drink. In this case, that meant figuring out what the heck he meant. It took me more than a decade, but I did it. Number 1, 3 of a kind beats 2 pair. It's the simplest rule in poker. But the reality is that during the heat of the game, when the pot's building and the chips are flying, it's really easy to fall in love with that pair of kings and forget that 3 lowly 2s could win it all. Grandpa Bud's message: if you're going to play the game, know the rules. Number 2, never play poker with a nun. Grandpa was a German Lutheran who married into a big Irish Catholic family. Grandma Bertha had 2 brothers and a son who were priests, and a niece and a grandniece who were nuns. Card playing was part of every family get-together, and the go-to activity during bad weather on fishing trips. It was on one such soggy trip to northern Minnesota with Grandma and her nun nieces that he learned the realities of the women and the habits. The nuns in our family played a lot of cards. They were great with numbers, and by profession, they knew how to keep a straight face. That meant that within mere minutes of learning a new game, they'd have it mastered. If they should decide to focus their skills on poker, they'd have had all your money and just smiled and said, "Thank you for your kind donation to the Widows and Orphans Fund." The lesson: don't be deceived by outward appearances. Ever. It could cost you dearly. These are lessons that have proven over and over to be invaluable to me. I've often shared them with my kids, and I look forward to the day when I can share them with my grandkids, just like Grandpa Bud did. I'll look up over my tackle box, stare that youngster in the eye, and say, "You know, there's 2 things you need to remember if you want to be successful in life." If you like this story, please like, follow, or subscribe. Thanks.